Forceps. Sutures. Nurse. Let's close this patient up. Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and today I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on cable stitching. Before I jump in, let me set things up and start by taking a look at some of the stuff I have laid out here. First, I have all the power delivery cables cut to length, pinned and sleeved. Now, I've done a few videos on how to do all that and get this far, so I've put all those videos in a custom cabling playlist. You can find that here or in the description below. Over here is the patient or the PC these cables will be going into. This is a modified Lian Lancool 2 mesh. If you're curious about the modifications I made and the fabrication of this custom panel, those videos are also linked in the description below. And finally, here we have some surgical equipment. Weird, right? Well, I said this was a cable stitching tutorial, and it really is. Now, there are several ways to stitch or lace cables, and electricians have been doing it for many years in many different applications. The two main techniques, the Kansas City stitch and particularly the Chicago stitch, have been incorporated into custom PC cabling. I've used the Chicago stitch many times and it works great. It's an awesome way to lock your cables into exactly the form and path you want them in. The downside, however, is that the lacing thread is very visible using those methods. It also bunches or tightens the wire together at the spot where you lace the cables, and again, in many instances, that's fine. It just looks like a thin little cable comb. But for this project, I don't want to see the lacing, and I want nice, straight, even cable runs. So instead of using a continuous stitch or lace, I'll be using the simple interrupted stitch, or better known as the surgical suture. I'm going to perform surgery on my PC. Last thing before I start, because I know there are electricians or just anyone with common sense yelling at the screen or drafting a scolding comment right now thinking, are you crazy? You're gonna stick a needle into your computer's power cables? Yes, I am. And yes, you are right to be concerned. First off, I wouldn't do this with any cheap off-the-shelf wire with a soft sheathing that can be easily punctured. The 16 gauge wire I use, I get from Mainframe Customs, and it has a very, very hard and tough insulating sheath. Second, I blunt my needles with a file before I start. But even with a new sharp needle, it's nearly impossible to puncture this wire with this needle. I really have to try. Now, because there is a very slight possibility of nicking the insulation and exposing the inner copper strands, I'm recommending caution if this is something you want to try. Again, this isn't something you do with just any wire, and I'll leave a link to this wire in the description below. Okay, let's get into this, and I guess I should start by showing you the tools and supplies I'll be using. The first and the key to being able to do this are these curved sewing needles. I got these in a bag of assorted sizes a long time ago, but you can find them online for pretty cheap. I actually have no idea what the intended purpose of these are. I'm not really a seamstress, but they look and work almost identically to a suture needle, which I am accustomed to using. Next is a needle holder, and this is kind of like a tiny pair of needle nose pliers with a locking clip on the handle. This is just a nice sharp pair of dissecting scissors I can cut my thread with. I have a pair of forceps or tweezers, and these are actually just the ones from my iFixit kit. And finally, I have a roll of wildfire thermally bonded thread. This is the only thread I use since I've discovered it about 5 or 6 years ago. It's thin but rigid. It doesn't fray at the ends like most thread, and it's very strong, so it's really tough to snap it when doing the instrument tie I'll be showing you in a minute. All right, let's set this up. So, starting with the computer, I'm going to begin wiring up my GPU and work generally from left to right. To do this, I'm going to run the wires one at a time, and because I've gone with this horizontal pass-through orientation for the GPU, I'm going to start with wire 8 here. So it corresponds to the bottommost rear pin of my GPU. Now, my plan was to sew the cables starting right at the GPU or motherboard and all the way down the back, because I couldn't find the cable combs I wanted for this build, but with a whole lot of Google searching, I finally found them. These are captive cable combs, so as I run my wires to the connector, I'll run them through the cable combs too. Okay, I have my first set of wires run. Now it's time to sew them together and lock them in place. And I'm going to start by positioning my computer by laying it down. So the wires are running horizontally to my viewpoint, and it's time to start stitching. I'm going to start with about an 18-inch piece of string. And now I'm going to thread my needle by passing the thread through the eye. Just about an inch, and then just tying it off in a simple square knot. Okay, so now I just want to secure my needle in my needle holder. So I'm going to open up my needle holder, and I'm going to grab the needle. I grab it just below the eyelet, but once you start doing this, wherever it's comfortable for you, generally it's between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way down from the back of the needle. And then I'm going to lock it in place. So it looks like this. Now, for the tie, I'll be doing an instrument tie because for me, it's the quickest and it's also wastes the least amount of thread. If I were to do a hand tie, I would need a good amount of thread on either side to manipulate and tie the knot. One of those long ends would then be clipped off, wasting a lot of thread. Okay, let's put in our first stitch. And I'm gonna start as close to where the wire passes through the panel as I can. I'm going to grab this outside wire with my forceps, and then going through the side of the cable sheathing and coming out the bottom, I just rotate my wrist so the needle comes back up through the center of the wires here. Now I'll pull it all the way through until there's just about a 1 inch or so piece of thread sticking out. Now on the next wire, what I want to do is right in the same area, I want to come about underneath the bottom of the wire and then just up through the side and pull my needle all the way through. To make the instrument tie, I'm going to release the needle and palm it in my non-dominant hand. Then begin by wrapping the long end of the thread away from you loosely around the beak of the needle holder twice. Once it's looped twice, grab the other short end of the thread with the needle holder and pull it through the loops and tighten by pulling away from you. Now let go of the small end and loop the thread around the needle holder towards you once. Again, grab the small end and tighten, this time pulling the long end towards you. Finally, repeat this process one more time with a single loop around the holder away from you and tighten, pulling away. Now you can trim the threads. All right, now I'll go down just a couple of inches and quickly show you that one more time. Two rotations away from me, grab the end and tighten away. One rotation towards me, grab the small end and tighten towards me. And finally, one rotation away, grab the end and tighten away to lock that knot into place and trim. And that's a simple interrupted stitch using an instrument tie. So now you know how to stitch cables into a custom PC and, well, suture a wound if the need ever arises. So, you know, two birds. But to finish this off, what I'm gonna do is install all 26 of the bottom wires for the GPU, ATX, and EPS cables. I'll get them all in place, stitched, and then starting back on the left, I'll stitch in the top wires. Now for the top wire, instead of stitching the wire to the one next to it, I'm just gonna stitch it to the one below it. So let me set that up and give you a quick demonstration of how that works. So here, I'm just gonna select the spot about halfway between two of the ties I made on the bottom. And then I'm just gonna insert the needle through the sleeving on the side of the top wire and simultaneously through the sleeving on the bottom wire. And then pull my needle through. Then what I'll do is I'll just tie it here as normally on the side. And the next wire that comes in will cover the small little knot and you won't even be able to see it. All right, now I have a lot of stitching to do, so enjoy the quick time lapse and then you can see the finished result. Okay, I think my time-lapse camera quit at about hour 3, but 8 hours later and the power cables are run. They're not done, but they're run and sewn into the case. I think they turned out pretty good. Of course, I'm biased. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and if you want to see how this build gets finished, be sure to get subscribed. Last thing before the end screen pops up, I don't really expect too many people to pick up a needle and thread and try this. Like I said, you do run the risk of nicking a power cable if you're not very careful, which is why it took me 8 hours to finish this. I really just wanted to show you all how I manage long custom cable runs like this. With that said, if you have any questions, please ask in the comments below. I answer pretty much every question my viewers ask me. Other than that, I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.